January 1943. Near Leningrad. The wind howls through the skeletal remains of a once thriving village, now reduced to rubble and snow. Beneath the icy crust, Soviet sniper Nikolai Kulikov lies prone, his breath shallow, his body a mere shadow against the white expanse. The world is a blur of gray and white, the only sounds the distant rumble of artillery and the occasional crack of a rifle shot. For 2 days, Kulikov has been motionless, his eyes fixed on the German machine gun nest that dominates the approach to the Soviet lines. The crew is well entrenched, their firepower pinning down an entire Soviet battalion, preventing any advance. Kulikov's mission is clear: eliminate the threat. His body aches from the cold, his limbs stiff and unfeeling. Frostbite has begun to claim his fingers and toes, but he dares not move. Every shift could betray his position, every breath could be his last. The German gunners are vigilant, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. As the third day dawns, Kulikov's vision blurs. His mind plays tricks on him, conjuring images of comrades long gone, of home, of warmth. But he shakes off the hallucinations. He has a job to do. The sun climbs higher, casting long shadows across the snow. Kulikov knows that the Germans will be less cautious now, their attention focused elsewhere. This is his chance. With a steady hand, he adjusts his scope, aligning the crosshairs with the machine gun nest. His finger tightens on the trigger. The shot rings out, sharp and final. The German machine gun falls silent. The battalion surges forward, breaking through the enemy lines. Kulikov's sacrifice has turned the tide. But as the Soviet forces advance, Kulikov remains in his position, his body succumbing to the cold and the wounds of war. His mission complete, he has given everything for his comrades, for his country. In the aftermath, the Soviet command honors Kulikov's bravery and dedication. His actions become a symbol of the resilience and sacrifice of the Soviet sniper corps. Though his name may not be as widely known as some, his legacy endures in the hearts of those who remember the sniper who waited 3 days without moving and saved an entire battalion. January 4, 1943, the outskirts of Krasnogvardeskoye, near the frozen banks of the Volkhov River. The morning light is pale and weak, glinting off the jagged remnants of wooden houses and broken fences. Snow crunches under the boots of the Soviet infantry, their movements cautious, deliberate. Each man knows the cost of a single misstep machine gun fire could cut them down in an instant. Kulikov remains hidden, a ghost against the snow, his rifle an extension of his body. Hours have blurred together. Hunger gnaws at his stomach, but he cannot risk a shift that might reveal him. Frostbite has claimed most of his fingers, and his lips are cracked and blue, but his eyes, sharp and focused, betray no weakness. Below him, the German position sits like a dark scar across the white landscape. The crew 3 men are methodical, unaware of the sniper lying in wait. Their MG-42 rattles intermittently, sending bursts of deadly metal across the frozen fields, forcing Soviet troops to huddle behind whatever cover they can find. Kulikov's mind drifts to his training under Vasily Zaitsev in Stalingrad. Patience, Zaitsev had said. Your body will suffer, your mind will beg for release. But the moment will come, and when it does, every second of suffering counts. He recalls nights spent lying in frozen trenches, practicing breathing, calculating distances, wind, and drop. None of that training could have prepared him for this, a 3-day vigil in near-total isolation, surrounded by the unending silence of snow-covered ruins, punctuated only by distant explosions. By midday, the Germans take a brief reprieve. They remove snow from the gun barrel, stretch, sip steaming mugs of black coffee. Kulikov observes, memorizing each movement, calculating the rhythm of their routine. Any premature shot could alert the others, and the battalion below would remain pinned, trapped like rats under a glass. The cold bites deeper now, a merciless predator. His nose runs, his ears ache, and the pain in his joints is sharp enough to make him flinch, but he does not. He has learned to become invisible not just to the enemy but to his own instincts. Hours pass. Snow begins to fall again, a thin veil that offers both cover and challenge. Visibility drops. Kulikov adjusts his scope, aligning with the faint outlines of the German gunners. His finger hovers, trembling slightly, not from fear, but from fatigue and the cold that has seeped into his bones. Then a small movement, a German soldier shifts his weight, exposing the back of his neck. Kulikov's breath catches. This is it. Every moment of suffering, every hour of waiting has led to this instant. He steadies his aim, aligns the crosshairs, and waits for the perfect opening. The shot, when it comes, is precise. The lead German collapses, the others scramble in confusion. Kulikov breathes through his nose, remaining still, as the machine gun falls silent. The battalion, sensing the shift, begins their advance across the snow-choked fields. For the first time in 3 days, Kulikov allows himself a thought beyond survival. The men below, hundreds of them, are moving forward, lives preserved by his resolve. His body protests, screaming for movement, but he stays prone, every nerve a taut wire, knowing he cannot yet retreat. Above him, clouds darken, heavy with more snow. The battlefield is quieting in a deceptive lull. Kulikov's presence, almost mythic now, is a testament to endurance, patience, and an almost inhuman will to survive and serve. January 4th to 5th, 1943, edge of Krasnogvardiskoye. The snow never stopped. For 36 hours, Nikolai Kulikov had been a shadow. Barely breathing, his body pressed to the earth, feeling each icy crystal bite through his uniform. Every muscle screamed in protest, and frostbite gnawed at his fingers and toes. He could barely feel them anymore, yet he refused to move. Every twitch could betray him. Below him, the Soviet battalion remained pinned, soldiers crawling from ruined walls to frozen trenches, bullets tearing the snow behind them. The machine gun crew above was methodical, unrelenting. Kulikov studied them relentlessly, memorizing their routines, their glances, the rhythm of their firing. He imagined the trajectories, calculated the wind, accounted for bullet drop across the open snowfields. Hunger gnawed at him. Thirst parched his throat. Sleep blurred his thoughts, conjuring phantom voices and visions of home in distant villages. He fought against hallucinations, grounding himself in the mechanics of his rifle. Every exhalation fogged the scope. Every heartbeat reminded him of the fragility of life. Hours melted into each other. Occasionally, he adjusted slightly, careful not to shift too much weight. The snow fell steadily, muting the world, making him invisible even to the eagle-eyed Germans. He could hear the distant artillery, the shriek of mortar, the cracking of frozen wood, but none of it reached him here. He was alone, yet tethered to the fate of hundreds. By the second night, Kulikov's body had become alien to him. Numb, rigid, with shards of pain shooting through his limbs, he forced his mind into a singular focus: survival for the mission. His breath, visible in the frozen air, was a constant reminder that movement meant death, but inaction meant the battalion could advance. The German machine gun crew, unaware of the silent observer, took brief moments to sip from thermoses, reload, or share a word in their harsh guttural tones. Kulikov traced each gesture, memorized every posture. He was waiting for that single opening. Finally, on the third day, the Germans shifted their guard, careless under the veil of falling snow. Kulikov's pulse synchronized with the rhythm of their momentary relaxation. A bead of sweat ran down his temple despite the cold. His finger itched on the trigger. The first shot rang out a sharp, clean crack that shattered the winter silence. One of the machine gunners dropped instantly, the rifle clattering to the snow. Confusion erupted among the remaining two, their fire faltering. Across the snow-choked field, the Soviet battalion surged forward. Kulikov allowed himself a silent acknowledgement. The breakthrough had begun. Even as the men advanced, he did not move. The cold and exhaustion held him captive. Every instinct screamed to retreat, but he remained, observing, waiting, ensuring the mission's final success. The battalion's cheers were muted from his position, but he felt their progress as a lifeline, proof that his endurance had mattered. By the time night fell again, the battalion had passed, and the German threat was neutralized. Only then did Kulikov slowly, carefully, begin to crawl from his frozen vigil. His body protested every movement, but the sight of advancing comrades fueled a surge of energy he had thought impossible. This was the moment of quiet triumph. The sniper who had spent nearly 72 hours in the snow had altered the course of a battle, saving hundreds of lives and ensuring the Soviet advance in a frozen hellscape that could have consumed any ordinary man. January 5, 1943, aftermath of the breakthrough near Krasnogvardiskoye. Kulikov's body screamed in protest as he slowly rose from the snow. Each movement was agony, fingers blackened and useless, toes numb and frostbitten, muscles cramping violently. Every joint felt shattered. Yet, the sight of the advancing battalion below, finally moving freely, gave him a fierce sense of purpose. He had completed his mission. The men did not yet see him. He was still part of the frozen landscape, blending seamlessly into the wreckage of trees and snow. He allowed himself a brief moment to observe. The survivors were cautious, checking every corner for remaining German fire. But the pressure that had pinned them down for days had lifted. Kulikov's patience had carved a path through what seemed an impenetrable wall of enemy fire. A medic finally found him hours later. The young man gasped, taking in Kulikov's condition. "Comrade, you've been out here 3 days?" The voice sounded distant, distorted through Kulikov's own foggy consciousness. The medic knelt, offering water and warm cloths. Kulikov tried to smile, but his lips cracked and split. Pain shot through his body with every blink, every breath. Yet he refused to complain. He had been trained to endure, and in those 72 hours, he had learned that the mind could drive the body far beyond what it seemed capable of. Every hallucination, every pang of hunger or cold, had been a test of his resolve, and he had passed. As medics worked, Kulikov's thoughts drifted back to Zaitsev, his mentor. The lessons in patience, calculation, and control had not been abstract, they had been life-saving. He realized that true skill was not in the shot itself, but in surviving the hours, days, and pain leading up to it. That night, wrapped in blankets and sitting by a small fire, Kulikov reflected on the battle. The snow fell silently outside, covering the scars of war with a deceptive purity. Yet inside him, he knew the cost of survival. He had preserved lives, but he had nearly lost his own to the unforgiving winter. He spoke little of his ordeal. Among comrades he was simply Kulikov the sniper. The story of his frozen vigils spread quietly through the unit, whispered by soldiers who had glimpsed him moving only after the breakthrough. He became a symbol of endurance and sacrifice, a reminder that sometimes the most crucial victories were won not with explosive heroics, but with patience, pain, and unwavering focus. For Kulikov, the war was far from over. But in those frozen fields, in the aftermath of 3 days that could have killed him, he had achieved something extraordinary. He had bent time and pain to his will, and in doing so, had saved hundreds of his comrades from certain death. The battalion, now free from the machine gun's deadly suppression, pushed deeper into enemy lines, unaware that their freedom had been purchased by one man lying motionless in the snow. And Kulikov, though battered and barely alive, felt a quiet satisfaction. The mission had succeeded. January 6, 1943, Krasnogvardiskoye outskirts. Near the Volkhov River, the snow had turned to slush in the newly trampled fields, gray and brown with mud and blood. The battalion had advanced, but the remnants of the German defense still lingered in small pockets that now seemed less threatening, weakened by the removal of their machine gun anchor. Kulikov remained in the makeshift aid station, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, watching through half-lidded eyes as the soldiers moved forward. Pain consumed him. Fingers blackened from frostbite twitched uncontrollably. Each breath burned his lungs as if ice had filled them. Yet beneath the agony, a quiet pride settled over him. He had carried out the mission exactly as instructed, and it had worked. Hundreds of lives had been spared, and the advance had been secured. The medics moved with urgency, tending to the wounded and helping soldiers collapse onto makeshift stretchers. They whispered about the sniper, a man who had survived 3 days in the open snow without moving, who had outlasted the frost, hunger, and fear. Kulikov simply listened, never correcting exaggerations or allowing the story to grow too loud. He knew that true heroism required no embellishment. Night fell, and the world became a silent expanse of gray and white once more. Kulikov stared at the stars above, their cold light reflecting off the frozen ruins. He thought of Zaitsev, of lessons learned on the Stalingrad front, and of every man who had endured alongside him. War was relentless, cruel, and indifferent, yet it had carved moments of unimaginable human will. He had been one of them. In the distance, artillery fire continued a drumbeat of destruction and persistence. Yet now, the sounds of war were tempered by the knowledge that a key obstacle had been removed. The battalion could continue its mission, step by frozen step, through the unforgiving winter. And Kulikov, though battered and near unconscious, was a silent witness to their survival. As dawn approached, a small contingent of officers approached him, eyes wide with a mix of respect and disbelief. They had heard the rumors of his vigil, but seeing him alive, barely standing, was another matter entirely. Kulikov acknowledged them with a weak nod, the weight of the last 72 hours pressing down on him like the snow that still clung stubbornly to his uniform. One officer finally spoke, voice low and steady. "Comrade Kulikov, your actions today, you have saved many. The battalion owes you everything." Kulikov's response was a faint smile, bitter and cold. "I did what I was trained to do. That is all." The men left, carrying reports of his courage to higher command, and Kulikov remained by the fire. He closed his eyes briefly, allowing himself a momentary escape from the pain. Memories of the previous 3 days replayed in his mind, the precise alignment of the scope, the frozen silence of the snow, the deafening isolation, and the single, perfect shot that had changed everything. In this quiet aftermath, Kulikov realized something profound. Survival and duty were intertwined, inseparable. Each second of endurance had been a thread holding together the lives of hundreds of men. And though his body might never fully recover, he had proven that one person, resolute and patient, could shift the tide of battle. The night deepened. Outside, the wind whistled through the skeletal ruins of the village, carrying with it the scent of smoke, ice, and blood. Inside, Kulikov lay back on his blanket, exhausted but unbroken. He had become part of the winter landscape, a silent sentinel whose story would ripple through the battalion for months, even if the world outside would never fully know his name. January 7, 1943, forward command post near Krasnogvardoskoye. Kulikov had been moved to a small command post, a fragile shelter made of timber and snow-packed earth. Officers huddled over maps, planning the next phase of the Soviet advance. His body still ached from frostbite and exhaustion, but his mind remained alert, replaying the tactical precision that had allowed him to neutralize the German machine gun nest. A senior officer, Major Petrov, approached, his eyes sharp but tempered with genuine respect. "Kulikov, your vigilance has saved the battalion. We need men like you at the front lines. You have endured more than most could imagine." Kulikov, bundled in layers of threadbare blankets, responded with quiet humility. "I only followed orders. I did what was necessary." His voice was hoarse, raw from the cold. There was no boast in his words, only the weary honesty of a soldier who had faced the full weight of winter, enemy fire, and isolation. The officers discussed commendations in hushed tones. Kulikov's story, already circulating among the troops, had reached the ears of higher command. Recognition would come, though he cared little for medals or titles. What mattered was the survival of the men below, their ability to advance, to fight another day. As the day wore on, Kulikov reflected on the ordeal. He thought of the 3 days spent immobile in the snow, of the hallucinations that had danced in his vision, of the relentless cold that had gnawed at his body. Each sensation had been acute, each moment a test of will. Yet he realized it was in those extremes that he had discovered the true measure of endurance, the kind that few men ever witness. He remembered the faces of the battalion soldiers, their cautious steps, the moments of hesitation under machine gun fire, and understood that his solitary vigil had been the pivot on which their survival had turned. The cold, pain, and fear had been instruments, forcing him into absolute focus, a mental clarity born from the necessity of duty. By evening, Kulikov was permitted a brief respite. The warmth of a small stove provided relief, but the frostbite in his extremities was severe. Medics worked diligently, attempting to stave off permanent damage, but he knew that the cost of victory often etched itself into the very flesh of those who endured it. He spoke little during the evening, content to watch the soldiers prepare for the next operation. Their energy, their chatter, their determination to push forward despite losses, reminded him why he had endured the vigil. He had been a single instrument in a larger symphony of war, a note struck at precisely the right time to allow the melody to continue. As night fell, Kulikov allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought of Zaitsev, the lessons in patience and precision, and the countless hours spent training for moments like this. He understood now that heroism was rarely instantaneous. It was often quiet, hidden, and measured in hours of unbroken focus, not in explosive action. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across his frost-numbed hands. Outside, the winter winds howled over the frozen battlefield, a reminder that war and nature were indifferent alike. Yet inside, in that fragile shelter, Kulikov found a sense of calm and understanding that his suffering had meaning, that his endurance had saved lives, and that, in the silent calculus of war, one man could indeed make all the difference. January 8, 1943, approaching the next Soviet forward position near the Volkhov front. After 2 days of recovery, Kulikov insisted on returning to the field. The medics protested, fearing for his frostbitten limbs, but he refused to stay behind. "The men need every advantage," he said, his voice low but resolute. "I am still able to serve." Bundled in heavier winter gear and supported by a stretcher when necessary, he moved carefully through the snow-laden terrain. The battlefield was a patchwork of destruction, charred wooden homes, shattered fences, and the remnants of German fortifications, all draped in ice and snow. Each step was a reminder of the harsh conditions that had tested him so thoroughly just days before. The battalion welcomed him back with cautious smiles, unsure whether he could truly resume his duties. Yet Kulikov's presence, quiet and unassuming, immediately lifted morale. Soldiers who had witnessed or heard of his 3-day vigil treated him with a mixture of reverence and astonishment. In hushed tones, they whispered the story of the sniper who had held the battalion's survival in his hands, frozen yet unwavering. Major Petrov briefed him on the next objective, securing a key river crossing that the Germans were using to resupply isolated units. The crossing was lightly defended but heavily monitored. Kulikov would operate as part of an advanced sniper team, providing cover and eliminating key targets from a distance. He understood the stakes, he knew the patience and precision required, and steeled himself for the long vigil ahead. The march was grueling. Snow filled the soldiers' boots, frost nipped at exposed skin, and the constant threat of enemy fire weighed on every step. Kulikov moved deliberately, conserving energy while remaining alert to any movement in the distance. His body still bore the scars of the previous ordeal, but his mind was sharper than ever. The hours of motionless observation had honed his focus to near perfection. As the unit approached the river, German sentries became visible across the icy waters. Kulikov took position atop a ridge, rifle ready, eyes scanning the horizon. The cold was biting, but he welcomed it. It kept him alert. Every detail mattered. A shift in posture, a glint of sunlight off metal, the faint sound of breathing. Hours passed in silent observation. Then, a sudden movement, a German patrol stepping out of cover, triggered Kulikov's instincts. The shot was clean, precise. The patrol was neutralized before they could alert their comrades. The battalion advanced across the river under the cover of snow and smoke, their path secured by Kulikov's patience and skill. By nightfall, the crossing was secure, and the battalion had established a forward defensive perimeter. Kulikov, though exhausted and in pain, allowed himself a brief sense of accomplishment. The mission had succeeded, and the soldiers below owed their safety once again to his unwavering vigilance. As the men settled in for the night, Kulikov reflected on the past week. From his 3-day vigil to the river crossing, he had learned the true meaning of endurance, courage, and sacrifice. His body was battered, his mind fatigued, but he had proven that a single soldier, guided by skill and resolve, could alter the course of battle in ways that few could imagine. January 9th to 10th, 1943. Forward positions near the Volkhov River. The battalion settled into a tenuous rhythm, but the threat of counterattack lingered like a cold shadow. Kulikov, still recovering from frostbite, remained vigilant. He moved carefully between observation posts, his rifle always at the ready, eyes scanning the white wasteland for the slightest hint of movement. The Germans were retreating in some areas but probing in others, and every patrol could conceal a deadly ambush. Kulikov's body, though weakened, had adapted to the harsh conditions. His muscles ached, and each step felt like dragging weights through snow, but his mind was clear, calculating. He analyzed terrain, estimated angles of fire, and memorized enemy positions, all while enduring the persistent chill that gnawed at his bones. The soldiers looked to him as a silent sentinel. Even the officers deferred to his instincts. They knew he had survived what few others could imagine, and they trusted his judgment. Kulikov did not speak much, but when he did, his words were precise and measured, reflecting experience earned through pain and observation. During the late hours of January 10th, a German recon patrol attempted to infiltrate the Soviet lines under the cover of falling snow. Kulikov noticed them immediately, 3 figures moving stealthily across the frozen ground. He held his breath, adjusting for wind and distance, and one by one, his shots felled the enemy. The battalion below, unaware of the sniper's exact location, moved with confidence, pressing forward without the threat of interruption. The encounter reinforced the psychological weight of his presence. Soldiers gained confidence, moving through the frozen terrain with the assurance that a guardian unseen and unyielding was covering them. Kulikov, however, felt no satisfaction in the kills. Each shot reminded him of the harsh calculus of survival in war, the cold, the hunger, the exhaustion, and the inevitable cost. Night descended, heavy and silent, and Kulikov remained at his post. The snow fell in sheets, covering the land in deceptive purity. Each flake reflected the cold moonlight, casting ghostly shadows that danced across the frozen battlefield. Kulikov observed it all, his breathing steady, his finger lightly resting on the trigger, prepared for any sign of movement. In these hours, he reflected on the nature of endurance. War, he realized, was as much about mental resilience as it was about firepower. The sniper's art was patience, observation, and timing. His 3-day vigil had taught him this lesson in its most extreme form, but every patrol, every reconnaissance mission reinforced it further. Survival depended on mastering fear, discomfort, and the relentless rhythm of the battlefield. By the dawn of January 11th, the Germans had withdrawn further, leaving the battalion in control of the strategic crossing. Kulikov, despite severe fatigue and ongoing frostbite, allowed himself a moment to close his eyes and breathe deeply. The silence was not relief, it was anticipation. A quiet acknowledgement that the war continued and that every soldier, every decision, still mattered. In these shadows of the enemy, Kulikov had become more than a sniper. He was a symbol of perseverance, a measure of what one man could endure and achieve under the harshest conditions. His presence, silent yet deadly, allowed the battalion to press forward, reshaping the battlefield one precise, patient moment at a time. January 11th to 12th, 1943, forward positions, near the frozen banks of the Volkhov River. The biting wind carried not just cold, but the ever-present reminder of mortality. Kulikov moved through the trenches with painstaking care, each step a negotiation with frostbitten muscles and stiffened joints. He had been in the snow for nearly a week, yet his mind remained razor-sharp, scanning for the faintest glint of enemy activity. His eyes had grown accustomed to detecting motion even at extreme distances, every shadow now a potential threat. The battalion continued its advance, securing small villages and strategic crossings. The soldiers were weary yet emboldened. They had heard whispers of Kulikov's three-day vigil, and his presence instilled a quiet confidence. Men whispered his name in reverent tones, Kulikov, the one who waited in the snow. The story had become legend, a testament to endurance, patience, and sacrifice. Kulikov's hands, though painfully numb, adjusted his rifle with practiced precision. He recalled each moment of his frozen vigil, the meticulous calculation of trajectory, the patience as hours stretched into days, the absolute stillness demanded by survival. Now, as he moved through the snow-choked terrain, he carried that same focus, ready to protect the battalion from unseen threats. During a recon sweep, Kulikov spotted a small group of German scouts attempting to flank the battalion. Without hesitation, he took position atop a snowdrift, aligning his scope with unerring accuracy. One shot, two shots. The flanking attempt was thwarted. The battalion moved forward without interruption, unaware of the silent guardian who had once again altered the course of battle with patience and precision. Even in moments of quiet, Kulikov's mind was never idle. He thought of Stalingrad, of Zaitsev's lessons, of the cost of war. Each memory was a reminder that endurance was both mental and physical, that heroism was often invisible, and that survival required mastering fear, discomfort, and isolation. He had endured more than most, and yet he moved with the quiet dignity of a soldier who understood the weight of his duty. As night fell, the winter darkness enveloped the battlefield. Kulikov remained vigilant, scanning the horizon, listening to the creak of frozen trees and the distant echoes of artillery. The snow, falling silently, blanketed the destruction, offering a deceptive sense of peace. But he knew better. War did not rest. Every man, every position, every decision still carried the potential for sudden death. By the second night, Kulikov finally allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The battalion had advanced, the machine gun nest was destroyed, and the enemy had been pushed back. His vigil, his endurance, had saved countless lives. Yet he felt no triumph, only the quiet satisfaction of duty fulfilled, tempered by the knowledge of the personal cost. In this frozen expanse, amidst the ruins and the snow, Kulikov had become a living testament to the human capacity for resilience. His actions, though largely unseen, had preserved life, shaped the battlefield, and demonstrated that sometimes the greatest victories are won not with the roar of guns, but with the unyielding stillness of one determined soldier. January 13, 1943, near the Volkhov River crossing. The battalion's push had created momentum, yet the Germans were regrouping. Intelligence reports indicated that reinforcements were approaching, and once again, the advance would rely on precise coordination and the silent vigilance of snipers like Kulikov. Though his body was battered from frostbite and exhaustion, he accepted the responsibility without hesitation. Snow fell steadily, coating the battlefield in a thick white blanket. The wind cut through his layered uniform, and each breath sent sharp icicles of cold through his lungs. Kulikov forced himself to move deliberately, conserving strength, understanding that any misstep could mean disaster. His legs were stiff, his fingers barely functional, but he trusted his training and instincts above all else. He took position atop a ridge overlooking a narrow approach that the Germans might exploit. Through his scope, he observed subtle movements, a shadow in the snow, a glint of metal reflecting the weak sun, a faint exhale of breath. Each clue required calculation, patience, and perfect timing. He had learned that every shot could be decisive, every pause could save lives. Hours stretched into a cold monotony. Kulikov's eyes burned, his body shivering uncontrollably, yet he remained still, his focus absolute. The battalion below adjusted positions, relying on his coverage. Soldiers who had witnessed his earlier vigil whispered encouragement, their confidence in his abilities unwavering. Finally, a small group of German soldiers attempted to advance across an exposed stretch. Kulikov steadied his breath, aligned the crosshairs, and took the shot. One by one, the targets fell, and the enemy's maneuver was thwarted. The battalion moved forward again, their path clear. Kulikov remained on the ridge, observing, calculating, and ready to strike again if necessary. The night descended, heavy with snow and silence. Kulikov permitted himself a brief rest, leaning against the frozen earth. His mind drifted to the endless hours of his previous vigil, to the 3 days of immobility that had tested the limits of his endurance. He realized that the sniper's greatest weapon was not the rifle alone, but the unyielding capacity to endure, to observe, and to act with absolute precision under the harshest conditions. The battlefield was quiet for now, but Kulikov knew this calm was fleeting. The Germans would regroup, counterattacks would come, and every man's survival would continue to depend on discipline, vigilance, and the courage to face unbearable cold and isolation. He had faced such extremes before and would face them again. His endurance had become both shield and weapon, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the crucible of war. As he watched the stars reflected on the snow, Kulikov understood that every moment of suffering, every frostbitten hour, had a purpose. He had become more than a soldier. He was a guardian of the battalion's survival, a silent force whose patience and skill would shape the outcome of the winter campaign. January 14th to 5th, 1943. Approaching the final sector near the Volkhov River, the battalion, having regained momentum, prepared for its final push to secure the sector. Kulikov, despite ongoing pain from frostbite and exhaustion, volunteered to take an advanced sniper position to cover the approach. Officers protested, fearing the toll the prolonged exposure had taken on him, but he insisted. "I am still able to serve," he said simply, his voice carrying the quiet authority of experience. The terrain was a frozen wasteland, scarred by artillery craters, fallen trees, and the remnants of destroyed villages. The snow reflected the pale winter sun, making every shadow potentially lethal. Kulikov moved with deliberate caution, placing himself in a vantage point that commanded a wide stretch of open field, a likely path for German patrols, attempting to disrupt the Soviet advance. Hours passed. The cold was merciless. Frostbite had claimed much of the sensation in his hands, and each movement sent pain shooting through his limbs. Hunger and thirst gnawed at him, yet he remained motionless, eyes fixed on the horizon, scanning for the slightest sign of movement. The battlefield was deceptive in its stillness, a white expanse concealing deadly threats. Late in the afternoon, German soldiers appeared, attempting a final push to retake the river crossings. Kulikov adjusted his scope and, with calm precision, began taking shots at critical targets, scouting units, exposed riflemen, and artillery spotters. Each shot was measured, conserving ammunition while maximizing impact. The Germans faltered, their advance slowed, and the battalion below pressed forward with fewer casualties than anticipated. Night fell, bringing a brief respite. Kulikov huddled against the frozen earth, his body shaking uncontrollably, but his mind remained alert. The lessons of his 3-day vigil returned to him: patience, endurance, observation, and the quiet control of fear. He realized that this final push was not just about defeating the enemy, it was about proving to himself that human resilience could withstand even the harshest of trials. By morning, the sector was secure. The battalion had achieved its objective, and the German forces had been pushed back. Kulikov, battered and frostbitten, slowly descended from his position. Officers and comrades greeted him with awe, recognizing that his unyielding vigilance had been pivotal in the operation's success. He allowed himself a rare smile, weary but satisfied, understanding that his perseverance had saved countless lives. The winter campaign, harsh and relentless, had tested every soldier to the limits of endurance. For Kulikov, the victory was personal and profound, not in glory, but in the knowledge that his patience, precision, and silent determination had shaped the outcome of battle. In the frozen fields near the Volkhov River, he had become a symbol of resilience, a living testament to the extraordinary capacities of the human spirit under the harshest conditions. January 16, 1943, Forward Command Post. Near the Volkhov River, the battle had ended, the battalion secured, and the frozen landscape once again quieted under a layer of snow. Kulikov, though exhausted and heavily frostbitten, was recognized formally for his extraordinary endurance and bravery. Officers and soldiers alike spoke of his 3-day vigil, the patience that had allowed the battalion to advance, and the precision that had eliminated the German machine gun threat. Yet Kulikov remained humble, insisting that he had only done his duty. Medical teams worked tirelessly to treat his frostbite, preserving as much function as possible. His fingers were numb, his toes blackened, and the sharp pain of recovery reminded him constantly of the cost of survival. Yet he bore it quietly, understanding that his ordeal had meaning far beyond himself. Every ache, every wound, every shiver had saved hundreds of comrades from the freezing battlefield. Word of Kulikov's actions spread quietly through the army, whispered from soldier to soldier, eventually reaching higher command. He became a symbol not for grand heroics, but for endurance, patience, and the quiet, almost invisible courage that underpins the success of any military operation. In letters and reports, commanders noted his exceptional composure, focus, and self-sacrifice, ensuring that his deeds would be remembered even if he never sought recognition. Kulikov himself reflected on the ordeal in solitude. The snowfields, the frozen trenches, the relentless wind all had tested him beyond human limits. Yet he had endured. He thought of Zaitsev, the training, the long hours of observation and calculation. He realized that the sniper's true skill lay not in the rifle alone but in the ability to endure discomfort, isolation, and fear. Those lessons had allowed him to protect hundreds of lives, shaping the course of the winter campaign. The battalion moved on to new objectives, the war far from over. Yet the story of the sniper who had waited 3 days without moving became a quiet legend among the troops, a lesson in patience, courage, and the unyielding human spirit. Kulikov's endurance was more than survival. It was a demonstration that one individual, determined and precise, could bend the flow of battle, even in the merciless winter of the Eastern Front. Years later, historians and military analysts would recount his actions, describing the frozen vigil, the near-impossible patience, and the decisive impact on the battle. Kulikov never sought fame. He had only sought to serve. But through the snow and the cold, through the pain and exhaustion, his legacy endured, a testament to the extraordinary capacity of one man to influence the lives of many, to tip the scales in a desperate moment, and to endure where most would have fallen. The frozen fields remained silent, yet within their stillness lay the story of endurance, sacrifice, and quiet heroism. Nikolai Kulikov's vigil, a test of mind and body against the harshest elements, had shaped history in ways invisible to most, proving that even in the coldest, harshest corners of war, the human spirit could prevail.